Labour's new inheritance tax laws, effective from 2026, will require farmers to pay 20% tax on assets over 1 million, affecting, according to the government's figures, 2,000 farms annually. This change will inevitably force many family-owned farms to be sold to cover the tax bill, threatening the entire future of British farming. So why is Labour doing it? That's what I've been investigating this week, and some of the answers may surprise you. There's been a lot of speculation on mainstream media and social media about Labour's motives. Some say it's ideological, in the same way that Labour have attacked private schools by forcing them to charge VAT on school fees. Some suspect that Labour want to attack what they see as the landowning classes. And there's certainly evidence that many people have bought farmland in the past as an investment and to shelter their wealth from inheritance tax. 20 years ago, bare agricultural land was valued at an average of around £3,000 per acre. 10 years ago, it had risen to £7,000. And today, it's in the region of £9,000 to £10,000 per acre. It's been a pretty safe and sound investment. There's probably a good fairness argument for targeting taxation in this instance. But why hit family-owned and operated farms? I was recently contacted by an old friend who works for a large property developer in the north of England, telling me that his company's directors had been enthusiastically celebrating the new changes to inheritance tax, with the expectations of a torrent of new profit-making opportunities. The reason for their jubilation became clear when one of the directors commented that the changes to inheritance tax were part of an orchestrated plan to prise land away from farmers to build houses. An orchestrated plan? As my friend explained, large developers spend vast sums lobbying the government, aligning the objectives of whichever political party is in power with the commercial goals of these firms. Take the Help to Buy scheme, he said. Launched in 2013, it allowed people to buy homes with lower deposits and with financial support. But in reality, it wasn't a policy designed by the government. It was, he assured me, the brainchild of one of the UK's largest property developers. It didn't increase supply, it just created more demand, pushing house prices higher. And that was profitable for developers. But you can only keep inflating prices for so long. Now we're at a point where mortgage repayments, taken when interest rates were low, are crippling people who now face much higher rates. Sometimes their mortgage payments are 3 or 4 times what they were when they originally took the mortgage. Many renters too are often living in squalid conditions just to put a roof over their heads, and they'll never save enough to buy a home. The UK's birth rate is now just 1.44. Our population is not replacing itself. To simply replace our population, we would need an average of 2.1 children per couple. We have 1.44. Why? Because young people can't afford homes unless they have family wealth to help them. Many are just waiting for an elderly relative to pass away in the hope of inheriting enough to afford a deposit. And this isn't a new problem, it's been going on for decades. If young people can't buy homes, how can they start families? This ongoing issue has created a chronic problem and creates further problems for the government. An ageing population without enough younger people to support it means a rising burden on health services, pensions and public services. So what's been the solution for decades? Mass immigration. Bring in more and more people, hoping they'll solve the problem in the long term. But this only leads to familiar consequences. Our infrastructure can't cope, and culture clash problems arise. And in many cases, much of the money those migrants earn is sent back to the country they actually think of as home, contributing little to our economy. There's nothing wrong with immigrants. Many of the greatest nations, like the USA, Australia and New Zealand, were built on immigrant populations. But bulldozing farmland to make space for people in the hope they'll solve the demographic problem is just a doomed cycle. Mass immigration continues, making the problem worse and denying more and more of the younger generations the opportunity to build families and prosper. Developers are rubbing their hands together because, while Keir Starmer has promised a fair immigration system, that's hardly a commitment to reduce it. And even if it were, none of his promises have been kept. Long-term forecasts show net mass immigration continuing at around 350,000 people per year. For property developers, every time a family farm goes up for sale to pay the inheritance tax, it's a potential opportunity to snap it up and build thousands of homes. You can build 10 to 20 medium-density homes on an acre of land. The land with planning permission is then worth 50 to 100 times more than its value as agricultural land. A distressed sale, they call it. A family in grief, having to give up their livelihood while dealing with the death of a parent. But why is Labour doing this? Don't they realise how crucial farming is? In an unstable world, we need to be able to feed ourselves, not rely on imports. We need food security. Well, they don't seem to care. In fact, their desperation to comply with the net zero agenda is also driving them to this. That agenda demands the reduction of the animal population and eating less meat. It means turning some farming land into solar and wind farms. And it's all based on a supposition that if we can reduce CO2 in the atmosphere, we can reduce global temperatures and avoid the nightmares that increasing temperatures are predicted to produce.
This is about how we can take advantage of new technology, take advantage of incredible opportunities to get the most for the UK. And I compare it to, like the best-selling book, one of the best-selling books in the 1960s was called The Population Bomb. And it said there's no way the world's population can continue to grow without massive famine and starvation, and it'll all be terrible. None of it was true.
So there's Jonathan Reynolds, the Labour minister, who recently claimed on BBC Question Time that a widely accepted scientific theory from the 1960s, the population bomb, has been proven wrong. Yet in the past, similar certainty existed about global cooling in the 1970s. I'm old enough to remember it. I'm not denying environmental issues, plastics in the oceans, pollutants in land and water, but I am sceptical about the CO2 narrative, because the climate record seems to show that increased CO2 seems to follow global warming, not the other way around. But who knows? Maybe it's all just propaganda from carbon-based energy producers. But the point is, you can't drag a reluctant nation into policies with little real public support or understanding of the implications and motives. The net zero agenda was signed into law by Theresa May with no mandate from the electorate. She'd already been rejected and shown the door, yet she did it in the dying hours of her premiership. You can't fundamentally change what we eat and how we live, the landscape of our land, without taking the people with you. If you do, you risk a huge backlash, perhaps even a revolution. A national government's primary responsibility is the well-being of its people, but we're in the hands of a government that doesn't seem to recognise this, or even accept that idea. Keir Starmer has openly admitted he'd rather be in Davos than Westminster.
You have to choose now between Davos or Westminster.
Davos.
Why?
Because Westminster is too constrained, and it's closed, and we're not having meaning. Once you get out of Westminster, whether it's Davos or anywhere else, you actually engage with people that you can see working with in the future. Westminster is just a tribal shouting place.
Starmer wants to be getting things done with the global elite, not responding to the needs of the people of the nation. And there's a sense of prejudice at play. Farmers are seen by some Labour figures as simply part of the privileged landed classes. The politics of envy is at play, but it's largely nonsensical. Many farmers may be technically asset rich, but they're far from wealthy. I was talking to a friend whose family own a few thousand acres of farmland. It's worth tens of millions in theory, but as custodians of the land for future generations, he and his family have not until now looked at it like that. But he knows that the return they get on their capital per year is tiny, 1 or perhaps 1.5% at best. If they put their cash into a manufacturing business, they might typically expect to get 7%, or a service business, perhaps 15%. They take a tiny amount of profit from their farm. The margins are just incredibly tight. But as he indicated, if Labour are going to drive people off their land, then why not join the exodus? Why not sell up and live like kings? To hell with responsibility. If the government are going to work against them, why not? Depending on the type of land, why not sell it to a large agribusiness, as some have already, or for wind or solar? Or why not make an absolute killing and sell it to a developer? If you buy into the World Economic Forum's agenda, the Davos agenda, as Keir Starmer does, then you're envisaging a future where we eat bugs, factory-made fake meat, a dystopia in which individual freedoms are crushed. But a storm is coming. The winds are already blowing across the Atlantic. The science is never settled. It always evolves, and it has been completely and utterly wrong so many times in the past. We're nearly all environmentalists when it means paying 15p for a plastic bag and separating our waste. But when it means impoverishing our people, destroying our countryside, and denying future generations the chance to build families and prosper, that's where we draw the line, isn't it? Keir Starmer, if you want to behave like a dictator, prepare for your downfall. If you want to be a democratically elected Prime Minister of this great country, take a deep breath, realise where you're going wrong, change course, and fix it. You need a mandate to do this kind of thing. Without it, you're just another despot in what used to be a democracy. Which begs a serious underlying question. Is our system of democracy fit for purpose? Or does it actually need real structural reform? And if so, how? But that's for a future film. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Please remember to like, share, repost and subscribe to the U Politics UK YouTube channel. Thank you.